Maldini.
Poi Maldini e segna Maldini!
They called him a god in Milan, a symbol of honor, elegance, and silence. But behind the armband, behind the perfect tackles, behind that chiseled face that rarely cracked a smile, was a man haunted by more than just the fear of defeat. For 25 years, Paolo Maldini stood as the ultimate representation of discipline in world football. He never sought glory, he never danced for the cameras. And while others raised their hands in celebration, Maldini often just turned and walked away, as if the job wasn't done, as if it never would be. But what does perfection cost a man? Beneath the surface of this unshakable icon lay a prison built from legacy, burden, and silence. Born into the shadow of a legendary father, Cesare Maldini, Paolo wasn't just playing for Milan. He was upholding a dynasty. Every step, every breath was measured. He became the captain, the legend, the wall no one could break through. But somewhere along that road, he forgot how to feel. When the world celebrated his loyalty, few knew he was being quietly exiled by his own club in the years after retirement. When they praised his elegance, few realized he was emotionally isolated, even from the game he gave his soul to. And when they called him immortal, no one stopped to ask if he ever truly lived. This isn't a story about goals or trophies or numbers. It's a story about a man who gave everything for football and received everything except peace. And maybe that's why he never smiled. Paolo Maldini was born on June 26, 1968, in Milan. Not just the city, but the sacred heart of AC Milan itself. His father, Cesare Maldini, was a club legend, captain, European Cup winner, and later the coach of the Italian national team. From the moment Paolo could walk, he was already inside the orbit of greatness. But that orbit came with a weight. He wasn't just a boy with a ball. He was the heir to a throne, one that demanded silence, discipline, and unflinching excellence. By the time he was 16, Paolo had broken into the first team of AC Milan. It was 1985, and Italian football was entering a golden but brutal era, an era defined by Catenaccio and Calcio's unforgiving rigor. At that time, defenders were gladiators and attackers were the stars. But Maldini was different. He played with an elegance that was almost out of place, graceful in his tackles, almost balletic in his movement. He didn't slide for show, didn't shout for the crowd. He moved like someone trying to escape notice, even as history was watching. Italy in the 1980s and 1990s was a battleground of style and substance. Clubs like Napoli were being led by the rebellious brilliance of Diego Maradona. Juventus and Inter had their own icons. And Milan, under the ruthless eye of Silvio Berlusconi and the genius of Arrigo Sacchi, were transforming into a football empire. Maldini became their face, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. He was surrounded by giants, Franco Baresi, Ruud Gullit, Marco van Basten, Frank Rijkaard. Yet somehow, even among legends, Maldini stood apart. Not taller, not louder, just steadier. He became captain when Baresi retired in 1997. But truthfully, many believed he had been captain long before the armband changed hands. His leadership wasn't vocal, it was absolute. Every player knew. If Maldini was calm, there was no reason to panic. He played as a left back at first, redefining the position. He wasn't a marauder like Roberto Carlos or Cafu. He didn't rely on speed. He relied on positioning, timing, and anticipation so flawless that he rarely needed to tackle. Later in his career, he moved to center back, and once again, became the template for a new generation, not through brute force, through mastery. But beneath the surface of this career, built on discipline, was an unspoken cost. Paolo Maldini was the son of a legend. Everything he did was measured against his father, yet he was not allowed to fail, or even to be merely good. The world expected him to be greater, and he was, but it came at a price. His personal life remained guarded. He married Adriana Fossa, a Venezuelan model, and raised two sons, Christian and Daniel. But even then, the cycle repeated. Christian joined Milan's youth ranks, and later Daniel, a forward, wore the same shirt. The burden of bloodline did not die, it simply passed on. In the national team, Maldini's journey was no less tormenting. He earned 126 caps for Italy, captained them for years, and played in 4 World Cups and 3 European Championships. Yet, he never won a major trophy with the Azzurri. His most painful memory came in the 1994 World Cup final, where Italy lost to Brazil on penalties. And again in 2000 at the European Championship, where a golden goal from France shattered their dreams. He retired from international duty in 2002, quietly, without fanfare. No glory, just the weight of another near miss. Still, the legacy of Paolo Maldini is built on more than medals. His Milan career is an epic on its own. He played over 900 matches for the Rossoneri. He lifted the Champions League 5 times, once as a teenager, once as a father. He won 7 Serie A titles, a Coppa Italia, and countless personal awards. But numbers don't tell the full story. His career is remembered not because of what he won, but how he carried himself through every storm. The media loved him, but he didn't care. The fans worshipped him, but he never played to the crowd. He never courted headlines. He never argued with referees. He never kissed the badge. He simply played. And when he made a mistake, which was rare, he never blamed others. But as the years wore on, cracks began to show. Not in his performance, but in his relationship with the game itself. He began to speak, softly but clearly, about the pressure, about the expectations, about the loss of joy. In 2009, when he finally retired, Milan gave him a grand farewell, but not all fans were kind. Some ultras turned their backs on him, citing his coldness, his distance from their world. Even in his goodbye, he was misunderstood. The Maldini myth was that of perfection. But perfection, in reality, is isolating. The world saw a statue in motion. Few saw the man beneath. In the years following his retirement, Maldini largely stayed away from the game. Offers came, from Milan, from Italy, but he refused. He said he didn't want to work in an environment where his name was just a trophy. It took nearly a decade before he agreed to return to AC Milan in a management role. And when he did, he led them back to glory. A Scudetto in 2022, a rebirth of the club he gave his life to. And yet, just a year later, in 2023, Milan dismissed him. Quietly, coldly, without ceremony. The perfect man had become, once again, expendable. When Paolo Maldini made his first team debut for AC Milan on January 20th, 1985, he was just 16. That day, he wore a face of quiet determination, like someone who already knew that this wasn't a dream, but a duty. Most teenagers tremble when thrown onto a Serie A battlefield. Paolo didn't. He stepped in like a soldier called to service, ready, reserved, and already carrying the weight of expectations he hadn't asked for. Under the guidance of Arrigo Sacchi and later Fabio Capello, Maldini blossomed into the backbone of one of the greatest teams ever assembled. With Baresi beside him, and legends like Costa Curta, Tassati, Gullit, Van Basten, and Rijkaard ahead, Milan became a war machine. Undefeated for 58 matches in Serie A. European champions, world beaters. During those golden years, Maldini rose, not just in stature, but in symbolism. He was Italy's answer to loyalty, class, and tactical perfection. His face became the face of Milan, his name synonymous with discipline, his presence a calming force in storms. He won everything, domestically and in Europe. The world praised him, coaches worshipped him, opponents feared him, and still he didn't smile. But the rise was never loud, and so the fall was never obvious. Paolo Maldini didn't fall with a scandal. He didn't crash with controversy. No broken legs, no drunken nights, no leaked interviews. His was a slow erosion, visible only to those who looked close enough. The first signs came from the national team. Despite being a world-class defender, Maldini's tenure with the Azzurri was marked by agony and unfinished business. The 1994 World Cup final, the 1998 quarter-final heartbreak, the Euro 2000 golden goal defeat. Each time he stood tall. Each time, he left the field empty-handed, and with each loss, something chipped away at him. Not his pride, but perhaps his faith in the idea that football eventually rewards the righteous. In 2002, he retired from international duty after Italy's humiliating early exit at the World Cup. Many begged him to stay, but Maldini, ever the rational soldier, closed that chapter without sentiment. "There's a time to walk away," he said. And he did. Back at Milan, he remained a constant, yet the burden grew heavier. Teammates came and went. Coaches changed. Tactics evolved. Maldini, already in his late 30s, adapted again, moving into central defense, learning new roles, staying relevant through sheer intelligence and anticipation. But by then, he wasn't just fighting opponents. He was fighting time itself. In 2005, Maldini faced one of the darkest nights of his career, the Champions League final in Istanbul. Milan led Liverpool 3-0 at halftime. Victory seemed inevitable, but what followed was one of the greatest collapses in football history. Liverpool came back, equalized, and won on penalties. For Maldini, who had scored Milan's opening goal in just 50 seconds, it was more than a loss. It was a betrayal. He had done everything right. And yet, the game turned its back on him. Many expected him to retire then, but he didn't. He returned, like a wounded king refusing to surrender, and 2 years later, he got his revenge, lifting the Champions League trophy again in 2007, his fifth. He played the entire final against Liverpool with an injured knee. No complaints, no celebration, just a raised arm, a nod. Job done. But his relationship with the fans had already begun to sour. As strange as it seemed, some ultra groups at Milan began to view Maldini as distant, too refined, too untouchable. They accused him of being above the club, of refusing to align with their ultra culture. In his final match at San Siro in 2009, banners were unfurled calling him arrogant. Whistles rang through parts of the same stadium he had bled for. It was a public wound that never healed. His farewell wasn't a celebration, it was a reminder. Even the most loyal can be discarded when they don't fit the image others want. After retirement, Maldini didn't rush into coaching or punditry. He stayed away. Interviews became rare. He seemed content to disappear from the spotlight, as if football, once a calling, had now become a memory too sharp to touch. He said no to offers, rejected managerial roles. He watched Milan stumble without him, but he didn't step in. And perhaps most telling, he refused to allow the number 3 shirt to be worn again, except by his sons. A small gesture, but filled with meaning. Legacy, for Maldini, wasn't about statues. It was about blood. Then, after nearly a decade in the shadows, he returned. In 2018, Paolo rejoined AC Milan as a director. His presence stabilized the club. His decisions, bold and modern, rebuilt Milan's identity. By 2022, they were Serie A champions again. A new era, but guided by an old soul. And then, like a cruel déjà vu, came another betrayal. In 2023, despite Milan's resurgence, the club fired him, coldly, without honor, without thanks. Some said it was business, others said it was politics. Maldini, once again, walked away, the captain exiled by his own kingdom. This time, he didn't fight, he didn't speak out, he just disappeared. If there was ever a man who looked like he belonged on a statue, it was Paolo Maldini. Chiseled features, upright posture, an aura of stoic invincibility. But statues don't bleed, statues don't break, and statues don't cry themselves to sleep wondering if they were ever truly loved or just used. Behind the myth of perfection lay a truth far colder than most dared to ask. Paolo Maldini wasn't just a footballer shaped by discipline, he was a man consumed by it. Football wasn't just his life, it was his prison. He couldn't escape it, didn't want to, until maybe it was too late. Growing up under Cesare Maldini was never ordinary. Cesare wasn't just a father, he was a national hero. Paolo didn't get to discover football like a child discovering magic. He inherited it like a family business, with expectations already inscribed into his DNA. When other kids were praised for effort, Paolo was expected to succeed, not just once, but always. He once said in an interview, "I've never played football for fun." It was a chilling line, not out of bitterness, but because it was true. Paolo Maldini's genius was shaped by obsession, not joy. His day began with training, and it ended with recovery. His teammates drank, partied, lived. Paolo studied, trained, repaired. Every muscle, every angle of defense. His body was a machine. His mind, a locked room. There are whispers from old teammates who say Maldini was often alone, even in the locker room. That he rarely joined the celebrations, rarely stayed out late. He wasn't cold, but distant. He didn't trust easily. He couldn't afford to. To him, intimacy was vulnerability, and vulnerability could crack the facade. That armor served him well on the pitch, but off it, it cost him. Maldini's struggle wasn't visible in headlines. It was in the empty spaces, the absence of joy, the way he spoke of trophies like tasks, not triumphs, the way he looked during celebrations, eyes scanning, never losing composure, almost as if happiness wasn't allowed, or worse, unfamiliar. He spoke rarely about his inner life, but when he did, it was telling. In a moment of candor, he admitted, "I don't miss playing. I don't miss football." How could that be, from a man who lived for it? The answer wasn't that he didn't love the game. The answer was that he never truly lived outside of it. And when it ended, so did the identity that held him together. In those first years post-retirement, Maldini drifted. He wasn't seen at Milanello. He wasn't on the pitch. He refused to become a talking head on TV. People assumed he was enjoying life, but those close to him said otherwise. He was lost. He didn't know who he was without the game. He had lived his entire life for a cause, and when that cause no longer needed him, there was nothing left. Worse, he began to resent how the very institution he had bled for treated him. AC Milan, the club of his life, had pushed him away. Despite his legacy, the board didn't offer him a serious role. He said no to ceremonial positions. He wasn't interested in being a puppet. So he waited, silent, watching, and the silence grew heavy. There were moments when he re-emerged, attending charity matches, offering brief interviews, but the spark was gone. Not the fire of competition, the spark of purpose. Maldini had been engineered to serve, and now he was a knight without a war. When he returned in 2018, it wasn't out of joy, it was a mission. Milan was broken, and perhaps in saving the club, he could save a piece of himself. He worked tirelessly behind the scenes, shaped a new vision, defended young players, restructured recruitment, and when Milan won the Scudetto in 2022, many said, "This is Paolo's title." But once again, when the lights shone brightest, he stepped aside. Let others lift the trophy, like always, then came the betrayal. In June 2023, AC Milan dismissed Paolo Maldini from his post. No thank you video, no ceremony, no statue, just a press release. Rumors swirled, boardroom conflicts, disagreements over control. Some said he was too proud. Others said he wouldn't adapt. But the truth hurt deeper. Even perfection wasn't safe. That decision broke something in him. For the first time, insiders said Maldini was visibly hurt. He didn't issue a fiery rebuttal. He just disappeared again. And in that silence, fans began to understand what they had lost. Because the darkest truth about Paolo Maldini isn't that he never smiled. It's that he never allowed himself to feel the joy he gave others. He gave us art in the form of defending. He gave Milan a spine. He gave Italy pride. But no one gave him permission to be human. He was raised to be a standard, not a man. And when the standard was no longer needed, he was shelved like a relic. And that's the tragedy few speak of, not that Paolo Maldini suffered a scandal or lost everything in disgrace, but that he achieved everything and still ended up alone. There are players who ignite stadiums, who live for the roar of the crowd and bask in the worship of fans. Then there's Paolo Maldini, a man who stood so tall, so still, so relentlessly perfect that we forgot he was human. At Hall of Legends, we look back on Maldini not just as a footballer, but as a symbol of something both admirable and tragic. He was the blueprint of loyalty, the guardian of legacy. A man who didn't just wear the armband, he embodied it. But in all the years he stood as Milan's sentinel, did anyone ever stop to ask, was he ever allowed to be anything less than perfect? We admired his poise. We revered his silence. But now, in retrospect, maybe that silence was a cry we were too enchanted to hear. Maldini's life reads like a myth, but not the kind with a happy ending. It's the kind where the hero wins every battle, only to find that victory brings no peace. He didn't fall from grace. He was pushed off the pedestal we built for him. First by his own club, then by a system that values spectacle over soul. His story isn't loud. It's not scandalous in the tabloid sense. It's deeper than that. It's a lesson in how consuming perfection can be, how living under the microscope, never breaking, never complaining, never celebrating too much, can quietly hollow a man out. And worst of all, that we, the fans, cheered louder for his performances than we ever listened to his silence. When Milan fans booed him in his final home match, it wasn't just betrayal. It was proof that even the most sacred names can be forgotten if they don't fit the script of the people. We say we love loyalty, but do we reward it? We say we admire discipline, but do we really see the burden it carries? And when the club fired him in 2023, after everything he'd rebuilt, we learned that legacy means little in the face of politics and power. A man who gave 40 years to one badge, player, captain, legend, director, was let go like a replaceable cog. That should have been the loudest scandal in Milan's modern era. But it was met with silence, just like the man himself. So now, we ask you, was Paolo Maldini a wasted genius or the perfect servant of a flawed empire? Did he give too much of himself to a game that never gave him permission to feel? Did football betray him? Or was he simply never meant to belong to it in the first place? The saddest part is, we may never know, because Maldini won't tell you. He never has. He never needed to. His truth isn't in quotes or controversy. It's in the way he stood every time he was knocked down. It's in the way he walked off the pitch, victorious or defeated, with the same unshaken gaze. It's in the way he taught us that leadership isn't noise, but presence. Not bravado, but grace. But grace, as it turns out, is a heavy crown, and Paolo Maldini wore it for too long without ever once asking to take it off. Today, Paolo Maldini is no longer on the pitch, no longer in the boardroom, no longer in the daily headlines, but somehow his presence still lingers, like the afterglow of a fire that once warmed an entire city. When we speak of defenders now, we still whisper his name, not because of the goals he scored, though he had those, not because of flashy tricks, he needed none, but because he made defending an art form. He proved that you could be fierce without being violent, elegant without being soft, silent without being weak. In a world addicted to noise, Maldini was the echo that never faded. For Milan, he remains the last true monarch. The number 3 shirt was retired, not out of tribute, but out of reverence. A quiet confession that no one could carry it as he did. It will only return if worn by a Maldini. That says everything. For Italy, he was the face of an era that bled for the shirt. No European trophy, no World Cup, but an undying respect that no medal could replace. He taught a generation that being a legend isn't about lifting silver, it's about how you carry the weight when you don't. And for those who grew up watching him, he was more than a footballer. He was a mirror of how to live with restraint, pride, and unshakable dignity. A man who never demanded attention, yet drew it effortlessly. A captain who never shouted, yet was always heard. In the end, perhaps Paolo Maldini's greatest legacy is the mystery he left behind. We knew the player, we admired the symbol. But the man? He remains, even now, partly hidden. And maybe that's exactly how he wanted it. Because some stories aren't meant to be explained, they're meant to be felt. And long after the final whistle, long after the boots have been hung, Paolo Maldini still walks beside the soul of Milan, not as a memory, but as a standard. He's gone from the field, but never from the game, never from us.